Let's discuss the embryology of the tongue. First, you see here that this is the dorsum of the tongue, and we see a terminal sulcus which is V-shaped, divides your tongue into anterior 2/3 and the posterior 1/3. Okay, initially it was an oral cavity organ at birth, but at the age of 4 years, it also becomes a part of our oropharynx, right? Can you see the dorsum is roughened? Yes, it's due to various papillae. One of them are the circumvallate papillae, you can observe, and they are arranged along the terminal V-shaped sulcus, right? Okay, if we talk about the functions of the tongue, yes, we know it helps us to taste different edibles and it helps us to speak properly. The third function could be it assists in swallowing and chewing our food. It also helps us in the production of saliva, which is helpful in lubrication. And above all, it tells us about the health of a person, whether he is ill or in a healthy state. It can be coated, it can be clear, it can be dehydrated, etc. Now see what next? Yes, tongue is that single large muscular organ that resides within your oral cavity. The special thing about the tongue is it is laden with the bulk of muscles, extrinsic as well as intrinsic. And you know what? Embryologically, they developed from the occipital myotomes. And of course, they carry the hypoglossal nerve to supply all the muscles except palatoglossus, which is being supplied by the pharyngeal plexus of the vagus nerve. And surprisingly, this in a real sense an organ which is being innervated with the 5 cranial nerves, the 5, 7, 9, 10th and 12th. We'll see later how they are being innervated. As we all know that we were just a plate at the time of development, week of 3. It is just ectoderm, mesoderm and endoderm. What happens next? That the growth occurs in the rostrocaudal direction or axis from superior to inferior aspect, and as well as laterally we grow in the lateral axis. Okay, what next? Now you see the lateral view of the fetus. Here you can mention that this is a place showing the face and the head region, and this is the curve of the body, and this is the tail. What else you can notice? This is the heart bulge and this is the liver. Of course the limb buds are there, but we are concerned about the development of the tongue. So see, there is no defined neck here. For that we need a special type of structure or apparatus called pharyngeal apparatus that is meant for the formation of neck structures inside various organs, and of course the facial musculature and the bones. So see, if we take a section, what we observe inside these pharyngeal apparatus and its various arches. Let's see. Now you can see the dorsum is being cut. The ventral aspect of the pharyngeal apparatus is showing us the midline cavity, which is primitive pharynx. Okay, as a tongue being internal organ, it must develop somewhere inside. So notice that this is the first arch, this is the second pharyngeal arch, this is the third one, and this is the fourth one. Fifth arch never forms, and this would be the sixth arch, right? So let's see the longitudinal view of these pharyngeal arches or pharyngeal apparatus to see how the tongue is developed. Let's see. Yes, in the picture number A, we have now of the vision that this particular pharyngeal apparatus is showing on its outer aspect the pharyngeal clefts. On the inner aspect, it is addressing the pharyngeal pouches, and these are the pharyngeal arches. We are concerned here with the pharyngeal arches. So, what happens first? There would be the midline swelling called as tuberculum impar that will be developing. This is the first indication that the tongue is supposed to be formed. And then there are two lateral lingual swellings. They overgrow more than that of this tuberculum impar, and they finally form anterior two-thirds of the tongue, which is the body of the tongue. And must notice that the pharyngeal arch number 1 contributes to these three swellings. So now we know that this first arch has made the anterior two-thirds of the tongue. Now see what next. There lies a foramen cecum, and we see another midline swelling called as scapula or hypobranchial or hypopharyngeal eminence. But we have seen that this median swelling is formed by the contribution of second pharyngeal arch in blue, the third pharyngeal arch in yellow, and a part of the fourth pharyngeal arch in green. So the three arches contribute in this hypobranchial eminence. What it is going to form? It will form the posterior one-third of your tongue. But here you see that the third arch dominates and the second arch portion is buried rather, and we can see that the most posterior part of the tongue is also formed by the pharyngeal arch 4. Okay. Now you see that there is another midline swelling called as epiglottal swelling, and just caudal to it there is a laryngeal orifice which is being covered or flanked on both sides by the retinoid swellings. Right. Now you can well observe that the anterior two-thirds of the tongue is formed by first pharyngeal arch and the posterior. Now this posterior one-third is being formed by the contribution of second third and part of fourth, and the most posterior part is formed by the fourth pharyngeal arch. Now see again in some other picture that what happens. This is the arch 1, second, third and fourth, and they are present bilaterally, right? And we can observe that every arch is supposed to supply or carries its own artery, vein, its nerve and cartilage. That happens with all these arches. So the first arch contributes in the formation of median lingual swelling or tuberculum impar and the lateral lingual swellings. Then this hypobranchial eminence or cupula is being formed by the second, third and fourth pharyngeal arches. Now we can see how they will align themselves in the formation of a definitive tongue. These two lateral swellings, they overgrow this midline swelling, and now we can see that this second arch is being buried and the third arch takes over to form the posterior one-third of the tongue, right? Now we will see the picture of a tongue. This is anterior two-third formed by the first arch, and this is the posterior one-third formed by the second, third and fourth pharyngeal arch, and this is the posterior most part formed by the fourth pharyngeal arch. Okay. Now you can see the merging of these swellings, lateral swellings, that they are getting attached. How? First they merge with each other and with the underlying swelling, and the complete tongue is supposed to be formed. You can see that this is a complete tongue, but it takes its nerve supply from different nerves of various arches. Let's see how. Okay, in this picture you can see that this is the anterior two-third of the tongue. Now here it is completely clearly formed along with the median sulcus, okay? And we see that the cranial nerve 5, which is trigeminal nerve that give rise to lingual branch, it will be supplying the anterior two-third of your tongue. Why? Because this trigeminal nerve is the nerve of first pharyngeal arch, okay? Now see next, the posterior one-third of your tongue. This is being supplied by the glossopharyngeal nerve, right? Because this is the nerve of third arch, and we have already seen that the third arch contributed more, and so its nerve is supplying the general sensory information or carrying the general sensory fibers and the special sensory fibers to this mucosa of the posterior one-third of the tongue. Okay, now see. Now you see that the posterior most part of the tongue is being supplied by the vagus nerve through internal laryngeal nerve, right? Okay. In this picture, lateral view of the fetus. Now you observe here that these are the occipital somites that will give rise to myoblasts. So occipital region myoblast will form the tongue skeletal muscles, and along with them they carry hypoglossal nerve, and that will be supplying all the extrinsic and intrinsic muscles of the tongue except palatoglossus, which is being innervated via pharyngeal plexus that carries the fibers of vagus nerve. Okay, the picture is showing various types of taste buds present along your tongue, the dorsal aspect, the palatoglossal arches, the posterior pharyngeal wall, and the palate. Everywhere the taste buds are spreaded, but on the tongue we can see the fungiform, the filiform, the circumvallate, various varieties. Now see how they are being innervated. As the taste buds, they are supposed to helps us tasting various things, so it is a special sensation. So see the facial nerve through its branch, which is chorda tympani, it is accompanying the lingual branch of trigeminal nerve, and it comes up to the anterior aspect of our tongue, so act as a special sensory nerve of our anterior two-third of the tongue. Okay, what about the posterior one-third of the tongue? Here the general sensory and special sensory, these both functions are being done by the glossopharyngeal nerve, and the most posterior part that is being innervated by the vagus nerve, which is serving again the general sensory and special sensory function, right? Another important picture schematically drawn to make you clear that how tongue is taking its contribution from various pharyngeal arches. Anterior two-third via first arch, the second arch being buried, and the third arch takes over in the formation of posterior one-third, and the most posterior part is via the fourth pharyngeal arch, right? And here what we have seen that as being the second one is buried, so the third arch takes over in the formation of posterior one-third. So as this area will be showing the placement of circumvallate papillae, taste buds, and they will be supplying or rather getting its innervation via the glossopharyngeal nerve, because they are just near the posterior one-third or along the V-shaped sulcus, right? This schematic representation will be showing you that various occipital myotomes, how they are coming towards your tongue and carrying the hypoglossal nerve towards the musculature of the tongue. Again, a schematic picture will show you that this is the anterior two-third formed by first arch, the second arch becomes buried, the third arch takes over to form posterior one-third of your tongue, and the fourth most posterior portion of the tongue is formed by this fourth pharyngeal arch. And in repeat, the occipital myotomes are supposed to get it into the pharyngeal arches to form the musculature of the tongue. Regarding the clinical application, you can see that this neonate has got the tip of the tongue which is tied to the floor through a thin frenulum and is unable to suck the milk, and while weeping is unable to protrude the tongue. So mother is very much worried about her baby. So this condition is called as tongue tie, or you label it as ankyloglossia. This is another picture in which you can see the tip is being attached to the floor of the mouth through frenulum, and it can be corrected surgically, and you can well see that now there is no more tongue tie. This picture again helps you remind that how the ankyloglossia presents and how we will expect that may or may not be surgical correction is needed.